Okay, so let's look at the amendment process, which is how we can formally change the U.S. Constitution. So what is an amendment? I just told you, and so did David Bowie, that an amendment is a change. And in our class, that specifically means we are referring to official changes to the U.S. Constitution. There are other ways that the Constitution can be changed over time informally, like when the Supreme Court maybe interprets part of the Constitution differently, but amendments are the only way you can formally change the actual written Constitution, change what it says. How many amendments do we have? We currently, as of 2019 anyway, have 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. 10 of those were added right after the Constitution was ratified, and those were the Bill of Rights. And so we've only changed the Constitution 17 times, really, since it was first put in place. And that's a period spanning over 230 years, so that is a pretty impressive record that should show you, one, that the Constitution was made to last, but also that it is hard to amend the Constitution. It just doesn't happen extremely often. And why do we need amendments? This is a key question, and it's maybe the most important feature of the Constitution is that we can amend it. So take a moment just to think about that. You can pause the video if you like, try to come up with your own answer. Two things that come to mind for me of why we need amendments would be, one, that our country changes over time. And so a document written in the 1780s is not going to apply perfectly to the 2010s or 2020s. And so we're going to need to be able to change those documents. So that is an important reason why we can amend the Constitution. And also just, you don't want a document that's too rigid. If it was too rigid and unable to be changed over time, it would not have lasted very long. You would have disagreements over the structure of our government, and with no amendment process, there's no way to kind of relieve that pressure. Think about, a balloon can inflate. It's elastic and can stretch, but it can only stretch to a certain point. And you almost think of amendments then as the release valve to kind of relieve some of that pressure. Pressure builds up. The Constitution can stretch a little bit to take that into account, but we need to relieve that pressure, and amendments can do that by changing the Constitution and giving us a new framework to work with. How do we amend the Constitution? It's not easy. Remember, it's only happened a handful of times, and only 17 times since the Bill of Rights were added. The Article 5 of the Constitution is where the amendment process is spelled out, and there are two ways it can start, and then two ways that the amendment can be ratified, and these can mix and match. So we could start with this method to adopt a proposal for an amendment, and then it could be ratified using this method, or it could be ratified using this method. Same way if it starts here, either of these ratification methods could work. Most of the time, the left-hand side here is how it works. So both houses of Congress can propose an amendment, and it takes a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress to propose that amendment. That is an extremely high bar. You usually don't get 2/3 of Congress to agree on anything. But once that would happen, the most common method of ratification then is that method right below it, down here, and that's that 3/4 of state legislatures then would ratify the amendment. So that is, right now that would take 38 states out of the 50 to ratify the amendment. So it's set up this way so that it has to be an amendment that has pretty broad support across the country and in both political parties in order for it to be ratified. The Founding Fathers did not want the amendments easily passed by a small majority. They didn't want 51%, basically, to be able to amend the Constitution. There's also the other method where Congress can call a convention of the states, and they could propose an amendment. And then another method of ratification is that conventions could be called, and in 3/4 of the states, if those conventions approve the amendment, it would be ratified. One thing to be aware of here is you can see federalism in action. Federalism is that principle of the Constitution that says we have a central national government, but then also a level of government below that that are the state governments. And so you can see that the amendment process starts by an act of Congress in some way, so that's the federal government being involved, but that then the state governments have the final say in ratifying it. And so that is a way that federalism is baked into the Constitution again. You'll notice nowhere is the president mentioned. The president really doesn't have any say in the actual process of amending the Constitution. The president could support or be against an amendment, though, and could, have a political influence on the process. Let's take a look at a modern example of an amendment that is in the middle of this process. There's an amendment that was proposed really in the 1920s called the Equal Rights Amendment that said equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, meaning that there should be equality across gender roles there. The Equal Rights Amendment was first proposed in the 1920s, and by the 1940s, both political parties supported it in their platforms, but there weren't enough votes really to get it approved. Remember, it takes a large majority. Congress finally approved the amendment in 1972, so this is kind of in the middle of the women's rights movement that came off of the civil rights movement, so you can see that it gained in support. But Congress did set a time limit for the states to ratify this amendment, and many states ratified it, but not enough before the deadline. The deadline was extended a couple times into the early 80s, but it did not have ratification from enough states. But lately, the reason we bring this up is it is kind of in the news again because some states have started to push for ratification. There are bills in Congress right now, as of January 2019, proposing to get rid of the deadline and allow states to ratify it again if they want and push for this. This is an interesting amendment. Some would say that the 14th Amendment already covers this, equal protection under the law. Others, supporters of the amendment, would say that there's not a specific protection for gender that the courts can fall back on, and this amendment might clarify that. So there's an interesting debate going on with this amendment. So right now, this is an amendment you can look up that is in that area between it has been proposed by Congress, not ratified by the states, and it's an interesting look at how the amendments are added. And I just wanted to finally look at the most common proposed amendments, and these are amendments that have not necessarily passed Congress, but have been proposed between 1999 and 2018. You can see that the most common is a balanced budget amendment, and also campaign finance and term limits for Congress are other popular topics. You can see that flag desecration, so like a flag burning amendment, direct election of the president to get rid of the Electoral College, the equal rights for men and women, that's the ERA there, school prayer amendments, and amendments trying to outlaw same-sex marriage. So you can see that there's a wide range of topics, and there have been thousands of proposed amendments that do not go anywhere because it's very hard to add them. So hopefully this has helped you understand how amendments get added. You definitely want to also view the amendment videos on this channel that go over the amendments that have been added, because you will need to know those as you prepare for the state test in the spring. If you have any questions, just reach out to your government teachers. Thanks for watching.